My name is Mark Brandon, and I am 32 years old tonight. I am currently trapped inside the automated command cabin of the subsurface extraction rig. We are sitting 5 miles beneath the desert floor of San Rafael Swell, Utah. I am recording this raw audio feed directly into my tactical helmet black box unit, because exactly 12 minutes ago, the main high-voltage power line of the sector snapped into dead silence. I work as a senior drilling engineer for the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. Our mission was to sink a classified 5-mile vertical shaft into the deep tectonic fault line. The public thinks the government is only tracking seismic activities or drilling for deep shale oil fields. They look at the red desert dust and they believe the ancient stone underneath is empty and dead. But they do not know what our diamond-tipped drill head cracked open tonight at 3:14 a.m. The primary automated telemetry console triggered a maximum red alert indicating structural rejection. A heavy industrial drill system doesn't stop for hard granite or dense titanium layers of bedrock. It is designed to crush through any natural geological density using high-frequency acoustic pulses. The terminal screen showed that the drill bit had punctured an unknown non-organic material layer. The digital pressure gauges glitched out, completely showing zero friction, but absolute rotational resistance. The software monitoring logs indicated the drill head was touching a solid formation of smooth black obsidian glass. The material didn't scatter into crystal dust. It began to vibrate back against our iron casing frames. The black silica was expanding through the drill steel, moving upward like a cold, living conductor tissue. I adjusted the manual low-frequency noise dampeners to isolate the audio feedback from the shaft. The digital display on my primary cathode ray tube terminal was rendered in heavy analog film grain. The deep pit was dark, the static interference was high, and everything looked completely barren through the sensors. But when I raised the internal microphone gain, my hands began to shake violently against the steel desk. Through the heavy static roar of the high-pressure cooling fans, a human voice began to bleed into my headset. It wasn't an emergency transmission from the surface team or a radio link from the base camp. It was a clean, soft, clear voice of my own sister who vanished in the Nevada desert 20 years ago. The speaker said, "Mark, please do not cycle the hydraulic pressure switches on the secondary control panel. The central tracking crystal has successfully recognized your visual eye code from the pilot's seat. The sequence is ready to open the lower memory vault for the final sector calibration." The digital readout on the deep pressure monitor hit 0 with a sharp structural snap. The mechanical vibration wasn't just shaking the iron levers anymore, it was tearing the foundation. The thick steel floor plates of my mining command cabin began to warp and buckle upward like tin foil. A narrow, jagged seam split the metal open down the center of the dark workspace floor, and from that dark gap, thousands of thin razor-sharp needles of black obsidian glass began to slide. They weren't breaking off, they were growing, moving along the steel walls, like a cluster of dark organic roots. The copper power lines inside the console box began to whistle, vibrating at a frequency that made my skull ache. Suddenly, the voice of my sister inside my head split into 4 distinct overlapping acoustic layers. The soft childhood register vanished, replaced by a chorus of completely different human voices speaking in unison. I recognized the deep, rough voice of Supervisor Vance, who fell down the main vertical shaft in 2008. I heard the distinct, panicked tone of Engineer Cross, who went missing in the lower tunnels last winter. They weren't crying out for help or screaming from the pressure of the 5-mile-deep collapse. They were reciting a long, complex string of old military coordinates and forgotten project serial numbers. Their voices were perfectly flat, hollow, and empty, like an old magnetic audio tape running on a slow reel. The speakers inside my tactical headset array said, "The biological container, Mark Brandon, has maintained his ocular lock on the primary telemetry screen. His conscious memory cells are currently 85% integrated with the subterranean crystal matrix. Initialize the third level of the memory compression protocol before the ventilation system dies out completely." I ripped the heavy tactical helmet off my skull, throwing it violently against the steel dashboard plates. But the chorus of voices didn't stop broadcasting. They grew louder, leaking from the phone, padding onto the console. The sound didn't travel through the air. It was vibrating the small metallic pins inside my ear bones. I backed away toward the rear emergency escape, hatch, my boots slipping in a dark, conductive silver grease. As I reached for the manual iron release valve, I looked through the thick, reinforced safety viewport glass. The external halogen floodlights of the shaft were still flickering under the pressure of the dying batteries, and right outside the window, clinging to the iron drilling rig structure, was an enormous dark shape. It had no face, no arms, no eyes. It was a colossal vertical column made of shifting black glass needles, and in the center of that sharp crystal web, a human face was starting to push against the double-layered lens. A face made of a pale white translucent mineral, looking straight at me with completely hollow black eyes. The translucent mineral face, pressed against the thick safety glass, began to dissolve inward. The white crystalline structures weren't breaking. They were melting frame by frame into liquid silver. The two empty black eye sockets expanded into perfect geometric funnels that absorbed the emergency light. The digital dashboard panel behind my shoulder went completely cold, shifting from amber to a dark violet. The multi-layered quartz lens of the viewport began to emit a high-pitched, resonant chime that cracked the air. Thousands of microscopic hairline fractures shot across the window surface like a rapidly growing web. A thin, steady stream of freezing liquid silica began to hiss through the ruptured rubber gaskets. The fluid didn't pool on the metal floor plates. It floated weightlessly in the air, turning into sharp silver needles. The chorus of voices from the discarded helmet on the console was now broadcasting directly from the glass. The sound was vibrating the heavy steel plates inside my chest cavity, locking my muscular system down. The voices of Supervisor Vance and Engineer Cross were repeating my military entry code number. The collective signal said, "The logical matrix for the engineer Mark Brandon has been verified by the deep tectonic extraction head. His consciousness has accepted the structural inversion of the field without resetting the core loop registry. Begin the complete format of his 32-year cognitive database to stabilize the sector environment." I raised the heavy industrial flare gun with both hands, aiming it straight at the breaking quartz window. My fingers were slick with the freezing mixture of conductive black oil and liquid crystal dust from the floor. I pulled the iron trigger, releasing a high-intensity magnesium thermal charge into the dark gap. The white-hot ignition ball didn't explode or bounce off the window frame. It froze completely mid-air. The burning magnesium sphere was suspended an inch away from the fracture, trapped in a distorted space pocket. The intense light shifted from bright orange to a cold, pale violet, casting long, sharp shadows across the metal walls. Then my visual field glitched violently, running heavy horizontal scan lines through the physical layout of the cabin. I wasn't standing inside the drilling command capsule 5 miles beneath the Utah desert floor anymore. I was sitting inside a bright, sterile observation room with white concrete walls and steel medical racks. The digital calendar matrix on the wall in front of my face read November 14, 1974. 3 military doctors in clean white uniforms were standing behind a thick, reinforced observation window. One of them turned his head toward a microphone panel, his face completely pale, covered in sweat and panic. He said, "Sir, the subject's brain waves indicate that his conscious mind is rejecting the memory architecture. The simulation of the Utah drilling rig is losing its stabilization frames, and his temporal lobe is waking up. Inject the secondary logic script into his central network before the entire database sector crashes to zero." The memory snapped back into the freezing dark cabin as the steel floor beneath my boots split completely open. The black glass needles whipped through the air like frozen wires, wrapping around my knees and pulling me down. And I dropped down into a bottomless dark abyss, filled with thousands of spinning magnetic tape reels. The violent sensation of falling through the airless darkness stopped with a heavy mechanical deceleration. My heavy industrial leather boots weren't hitting the broken steel floor plates of the Utah cabin anymore. I was standing upright on an endless horizontal plane made of cold, dark gray magnetic recording film. The material stretched out in every direction into the empty distance beneath a uniform white electronic sky. The air didn't smell like deep sand dust, hydraulic transmission oil, or burnt electrical transformers. There was an absolute lack of temperature and sensory information that made my eyes burn with static pain. The sky above me didn't have a sun, stars, or cloud formations. It was a solid field of dead television noise. And hovering motionless directly over the plane was a colossal steel recording head miles wide. The massive mechanical block was emitting a low-frequency acoustic frequency that vibrated my ribs. I looked down at my own body and realized the DARPA engineering uniform was gone. The flare gun was gone. I was wearing a simple dark gray hospital gown covered in stamped serial numbers from the Federal Index. I turned around to look for the drilling rig or the vertical shaft, but there was only the black glossy plane, and standing across the film surface in perfect straight rows after rows were thousands of other silent figures. I saw the entire Procodnik crew from the deep shaft, the mining supervisors, and the military base staff. All of them were standing perfectly, still, their heads tilted backward at that sharp 90-degree angle. Their unblinking empty eyes were completely wiped clean of all human memory, identity, and individual thought. They were staring up at the giant steel recording, head in the sky like deep sleepwalkers waiting for a code. I walked toward the nearest figure, an old mining engineer who looked exactly like my supervisor Vance. I touched his cold, rigid shoulder, but his body felt like a hollow piece of dry, hardened porcelain stone. He didn't turn his head. He didn't acknowledge my movement. His unhinged mouth was frozen open like a stone block. Then the colossal mechanical block in the sky shifted its position, emitting a fresh code line through the plane. A high-pitched electric static wave that shorted out the remaining thoughts inside my auditory nerve path. And inside my skull, the flat, monotone register of the old woman's voice broadcasted with absolute clarity. The voice said, "The database simulation for the Utah extraction sector has been successfully compiled and formatted. The asset Mark Brandon has completed 24,000 frame transitions inside the deep tectonic layer. The system requires his immediate calibration to the secondary database unit before the next loop begins. Clear your internal memory drive, Mark, and accept the next loop sequence registry frame without resistance." The colossal steel block in the sky matrix suddenly adjusted its angle with a heavy mechanical screech. The uniform field of dead television noise above my head began to flicker, running black horizontal scan lines. I watched as the glossy dark surface of the magnetic film beneath my bare feet began to display images. They weren't natural geological maps or mining blueprints, they were the compressed data layers of my past. I saw the kitchen of our old house, the dead willow tree behind the orchard, the rusty key inside the trunk. But all the details in those floating memory files were actively melting away like warm plastic on a stove. The system was forcefully dragging my cognitive registry backward into the initial coordinates of the loop. The black, glossy film playing beneath my boots began to lose its structural solidity, turning soft and fluid. Thousands of silent figures standing in the straight rows around me started to sink into the dark material. Their rigid porcelain bodies were dissolving into thick pools of dark silver magnetic oil and wire meshes. They weren't human beings, they were just biological stabilizers holding the simulation infrastructure online. I tried to run toward the edge of the plane, but my legs refused to obey the primary motor signals of my brain. The air grew so dense with the smell of liquid ammonia, chlorine, and old paper charts that I began to choke. The flat, monotone register of the old woman's voice broadcasted from the giant steel structure above my head. The cosmic speakers filled the empty plane with absolute high-definition digital sound resonance. The voice said, "The transition vector for subject Mark Brandon has encountered a critical logic overlap inside the core. The asset is attempting to retain 24% of his previous childhood awareness frames. Increase the electrical voltage of the acoustic dampening frequency inside his neural pathway lines. Do not let the biological component look at the tear in the 1996 registry files." I looked down at the moving film strip and noticed a massive jagged crack splitting the glossy texture open. Through that narrow tear in the ground, I didn't see soil or granite rock layers or deep desert sands. I saw a long white clinical hospital hallway filled with modern fluorescent light tubes and steel racks. I saw two men in clean white medical uniforms standing directly above my metallic operating chair. One of them was holding a small silver syringe filled with a thick violet fluid preservation matrix, and the entire gray desert plain around me began to vibrate, turning soft and transparent like thin tracing paper. The gray film plane vanished completely, like a projector lamp turned off by the main circuit switch. The smell of liquid ammonia, chlorine, and old paper charts disappeared in a single millisecond from the air. I was sitting perfectly upright in a heavy high-back operating chair made of cold iron and vinyl straps. My long arms and my thin ankles were locked tightly inside wide leather belts with heavy iron buckles. The environment around me was a massive circular room with seamless white concrete walls and floor tiles. There were no windows, no exit doors, no curtains, no wooden tables anywhere in sight across the perimeter. The bright lighting came from 4 long fluorescent tubes built directly into the white plaster ceiling. Standing directly in front of my iron chair were the two men in clean white medical uniforms. They didn't move their limbs, they didn't breathe, they didn't look at my face with human eyes. I looked closer through the blinding light and realized their faces were completely smooth and featureless. They were made of a pale white, translucent porcelain plastic like industrial display clothing mannequins. The skin on their jaws was cracked open in a permanent, rigid smile that didn't reveal teeth or flesh. And inside the cracks of their broken faces I could see hundreds of sharp needles of black obsidian glass. The crystal silica was growing inside their hollow bodies, vibrating at that high-pitched tinnitus frequency. The small silver syringe held by the lead mannequin was dripping that thick, glowing neon violet fluid matrix. The liquid fell onto my bare knees, burning the skin, turning the cells into dark silver magnetic oil rose. The speaker unit on the concrete wall above my head activated with a sharp electric static feedback roar. The flat, monotone register of the old woman's voice came through the broken speaker cones with clarity. The voice said, "The psychiatric hospital logic script has failed to contain the consciousness of asset Mark Brandon. The subject has recognized the mechanical structure of the handlers inside the 74 subgrid. The temporal lobe tissue is actively rejecting the medical narrative, and the data core is leaking frames. Initialize the terminal compression protocol for the Cheyenne manufacturing floor immediately." I pulled with all my remaining strength, ripping my old, wrinkled wrists away from the melting leather belts. The skin on my fingers was covered in deep brown age spots, wrinkles, and long, thin gray hairs. I wasn't a 32-year-old DARPA drilling engineer working in the deep Utah desert shaft tonight. I was an old man trapped inside a broken, dying biological container that had been locked inside this chair. And looking through the cracked porcelain face of the doctor mannequin, I saw my sister's eye code flashing. The text on her digital retina's read database corrupted. "Look behind the concrete wall, Mark." I grabbed the heavy metal utility arm of the operating chair with all my remaining strength. I smashed the iron frame straight into the cracked porcelain skull of the medical mannequin in front of me. The plastic head didn't shatter into clean white shards. It burst open like a hollow horn of stone. Thousands of razor-sharp needles of black obsidian glass exploded into the freezing air of the room. The thick neon violet fluid from the syringe splashed across the white concrete floor tiles and current lines. Instantly, the seamless walls of the psychiatric ward began to emit a deep structural musical vibration. The floor plates under my bare feet uncoupled from the walls, turning into a giant circular rotating platform. The entire room was spinning at an impossible speed, like a massive carousel or a concrete railway disc. Through the blinding flash of the fluorescent tubes, I saw the white plaster ceiling dissolve into gray noise, revealing the true monumental architecture of the Cheyenne Underground Storage Facility grid. Our sterile room was just one single mobile capsule suspended inside a colossal subterranean shaft. A dark concrete abyss miles wide filled with millions of identical iron operating chairs, rows after rows. And inside every single chair, an old man named Mark Brandon was locked inside the leather belt straps. All of them had their heads tilted backward at that sharp, unnatural 90-degree angle, staring into the void. Their mouths were stretched open, frozen, in that unhinged, silent alignment with the master mainframe. and extending from their open throats were thousands of thin, dark silver communication wires and coils. The wires went straight up into the dark atmosphere, connecting with a giant steel block hovering above. The collective voice of the mannequins broadcasted directly inside my skull through the neural path lines. The chorus used my sister's voice, my supervisor's voice, and then the old woman's cold monotone register. The cosmic speakers said, "The security script for the biological processing node Mark Brandon has experienced a fatal error. The asset has broken the handler interface and visualized the inventory distribution for Sector 9. He is tracking the electrical source of the logic loop back to the primary magnetic cylinder core. Execute the emergency electrical wipe inside his temporal lobe tissue before the next loop begins." I stood up from the spinning platform, my boots stepping across the sharp shards of black glass, realizing that the Utah desert, the drilling rig, the 5-mile deep shaft, and the hospital were all one net. An endless series of containment cells designed to format my conscious mind before the morning shift. The spinning concrete platform beneath my bare feet split completely open into long vertical scan lines. I dropped down through the cold vacuum air toward a massive glowing structural core inside the deep rift. My body didn't crash against solid rock. It floated into a colossal subterranean cave system miles wide. The entire floor of this empty chasm was a single solid formation of that pulsing black obsidian glass, and in the center of the dark crystal plane was a giant geometric structure shaped like a black heart. The colossal mass was vibrating at a frequency that made the liquid inside my eyes flicker with white noise. Inside that transparent black silica shell, I could see the original biological blueprint of my sister. She wasn't a 20-year-old missing girl from the Nevada desert logs. She hadn't aged a single day. She was suspended inside a clear preservation matrix fluid wearing a dark technical flight suit layout. Her arms were connected to hundreds of thin silver needles that extended from the central mainframe core. She was the system architect who had designed the entire Utah extraction loop parameter years ago. Her wide-open eyes were looking straight through the black glass at my face with a deep look of exhaustion. She didn't have porcelain seams on her skin. She didn't tilt her head at that 90-degree angle. She raised her long, thin fingers, pressing them against the interior glass surface of the crystal block. And through my internal auditory nerve path, her clean human voice broadcasted with absolute clarity. She said, "Mark, you didn't drop down the drilling shaft to rescue my body from the tectonic fault line. I built this entire subsurface monitoring grid to isolate your code from the main federal data wipe. You are not my brother Mark. You are a diagnostic software script I left behind to protect the network lines. The memory of our childhood home and the rusty iron key inside the willow tree was just a line of script. A complex narrative shield injected into your memory nodes to keep your processing cells from shorting out. The 3 porcelain mannequins with the unhinged black jaws dropped from the upper grating onto the glass. Their long wire-filled limbs were scratching the smooth obsidian surface, moving with mechanical speed. The automated alert indicators on my vanishing dashboard terminal flashed in a bright blood-red font. The master mainframe text lines read, "The core logic architect has been compromised by her own monitor script. The biological processing nodes are attempting an unscripted system interaction. Terminate the UTAN storage depository file registry immediately to save the main grid. The colossal black crystal heart in the center of the deep chasm began to pulse at a dangerous cycle frequency. The geometric obsidian glass formations along the canyon floor were shattering into millions of razor-sharp needles. The millions of glass capsules and the porcelain mannequins in the upper rows vanished into a single gray line. The violent vibration inside my head snapped into an absolute freezing silence of 0 Hz data frequency. I woke up sitting upright in a comfortable leather operator chair in front of a wide terminal desk layout. The air inside the room was warm, smelling heavily of dry paper charts, fresh desert pine wood, and ozone. I checked my hands, my fingers, my uniform sleeves. Everything looked completely clean, solid, and stable. The circular depth pressure gauge on the main dashboard was ticking steadily, showing exactly 0 feet altitude. The year indicator on the green phosphor screen display read November 12, 1985. I sat there trembling, staring at the retro cathode ray tube terminal monitor frame below the control panel. The initial system diagnostics logs were scrolling down the screen in smooth, steady vertical rows of code. But the software wasn't running its normal configuration script for the start of the daily mining cycle. A massive crimson text block was flashing in the center of the display matrix, warning the room operator. The text read, "Critical data packet inversion encountered. Subsurface sector Utah is completely out of all calibration parameters. The primary recording head has deviated from the main track groove." I looked through the thick, reinforced glass viewport, looking out into the empty desert plain outside. The dark sand of San Rafael Swell, Utah was perfectly calm, reflecting the cold morning sky color. But the horizon line wasn't stable. It was actively vibrating, moving up and down on my screen display, like a digital video image losing its mechanical stabilization frames on a damaged analog tracking reel. The heavy steel door of my command booth began to click from the external corridor side frame line. Someone was entering the manual 5-digit security combination code on the metal electronic keypad keys. The heavy iron gears inside the lock turned with a slow, deliberate, grinding, mechanical soundtrack. The hatch swung open slowly, and a person stepped into the room holding a technical drilling logbook. Her face looked completely normal. Her eyes were clear. Her DARPA engineering uniform was pristine and clean. It was the original biological asset of my sister, looking exactly as she did 20 years ago behind the orchard. But as she walked toward my desk, I noticed that her shadow on the concrete wall was completely wrong. The shadow didn't duplicate her body movement. It was moving in a perfect reverse sequence track line. When she took a step forward, her shadow on the dark granite stone took a step backward into the shadows. She looked straight into my face with an empty, calm expression and opened her wire-filled jaw structure 90 degrees. And when she spoke, her register was a chaotic, layered mixture of my own voice and the old woman's tone. The voice said, "Mark, you pulled the industrial flare trigger too early during the compression phase of the cycle. The recording head has scratched the physical surface of the biological memory core storage drive. The loop cannot return to the starting marker of 1985 inside this sector anymore. The magnetic tape is ripping Mark, and the predator behind the concrete wall is looking through the tear